Welcome everyone, Costin here with a discussion / guide on how to build a high-end gaming computer in 2023, or at the very least in the summer of 2023, because obviously things are subject to change in terms of pricing, in terms of what components are going to be there on the market. This is a video on which components to pick and why you should pick them. It's more about principles rather than any kind of specific component, because things do change, new hardware does come out there, but there are certainly some things I've learned over the years as I have built multiple computers and certain things to be aware of. Because when it comes to building a computer, you can spend a significant amount of money and not necessarily get the best hardware available. At least not the best hardware at the best price. So you got to keep those kind of things in mind. There's a lot of things to learn, and the tech media, when it comes to benchmarking components, reviewing them, it's pretty good. But when it comes to recommending what component people should buy and why they should buy them, I find myself more often than not actually disappointed by what the tech media does in quite a lot of ways. And some things they do get it quite correct, and other things they do leave a lot to be desired. Now, this video is for building a high-end gaming computer for 1440p 60 FPS. Basically, a computer like the one I'm going to show would be able to handle virtually any game that exists right now, unless it's really, really poorly optimized, at 1440p 60 FPS plus. Why not aim for 4K? Well, 4K is just more expensive, and even if you do buy a computer that currently handles any game at over 60 FPS 4K resolution, the problem you're going to encounter is that a year from now, 2 years from now, it won't be able to. The hardware just isn't there, even with something as a 4090. And there's a lot of trade-offs with something like a 4090. Sure, you would probably handle most games, but it is going to cost more. Like, just consider what it would require to go for a 4090. Like, the other hardware can be exactly the same. It's just a question of GPU, display, but that thing can add, let's say, over $1,000 easily to the price of your system. And if you're trying to game in 4K, you're not going to necessarily have the performance you'd want a couple of years from now. Whereas with 1440p, you can absolutely build a computer right now that can handle any game at 1440p and will handle games going forward for at least a couple of years at 1440p. The problem with 4K gaming, beyond the cost of displays, it's really a question of the GPUs. Like right now, we're just not in a situation where GPUs, any GPU on the market, is consistently able to handle 4K gaming. You might say, oh, consoles handle that. Consoles make a lot of trade-offs when it comes to actual rendering resolution, when it comes to settings. And consoles just, it's like fake 4K gaming in a lot of ways, in far more ways than upscaling on a PC with something like DLSS or FSR actually does. So there's a lot of issues with consoles. What about the budget option? Surely a lot of people would like a budget option. Well, when it comes to saving money, if you want to buy a cheaper system, my strong recommendation would be to look at the second-hand market and at previous generations of CPUs, GPUs. Like, you can buy brand new memory, storage, etc., because they're relatively cheap at the moment, or quite very cheap actually. But when it comes to buying a GPU or buying a CPU, if you want to save a significant amount of money, you can buy the previous gen ones, and they'll still be able to handle a lot of things you throw them, but of course warranty, the usage that you've already gone through, all that will affect them. But it is possible to save a lot of money. Or you can go down the console route and save a lot of money, but of course with all the trade-offs that come with using a console. Or you could potentially buy a laptop, because there is a possibility, and certainly has been the case over the last couple of years, where you can possibly get a laptop with a similar level of performance in a lot of ways to a desktop PC that is just flat out cheaper. And now, of course, laptops do come with their own major trade-offs, but those are your options. So in this video, I want to talk about the high-end desktop gaming PC and what are the things you should be looking at when you're building one from scratch, what components to pick. So for this, I've built or I've selected a bunch of components on PC Parts Picker. This is with American prices. Keep that in mind, because obviously regional prices do vary a great deal. This is another thing that's infuriating when it comes to the tech media. Like, basically the tech media would recommend, oh, buy that component, that's worth, that's the value proposition, but they only account for like really American prices, not all the regional prices that do exist, like in Europe, in other parts of the world, which can vary a great deal. But with that said, the best CPU, the best gaming CPU that exists right now is the AMD Ryzen 7 7800 X3D from AMD. Now, this is not the best CPU for multiple applications. It's not the best CPU for what the tech media would call productivity. So if you're doing rendering, if you're doing editing, if you're making videos, if you're going through a lot of CPU heavy applications, this is certainly a far inferior product than compared to what Intel offers at the similar price point. But for the purpose of gaming, this is the best one by far. It does deliver better performance than what Intel does with the i7-13700K CPU at roughly the same price from all the stores I've seen, for roughly the same price. And crucially, based on the benchmarks I've seen, it also does so at lower temperatures with a lower power consumption. It doesn't need the same kind of cooling power to get it running very well. It will run cooler, lower temperatures, and consume less power. And those things do matter. Like, when you're building a computer, what do you care about? Like, one of the things I do care about is temperature, power consumption. Another thing I care about, and just the level of noise that I'm going to have in my computer. In order to reduce that level of noise, you need components that are just going to run at a lower temperature, because obviously if they run at a lower temperature, you don't need to stress your case fans, your CPU fans, your GPU fans as much in order to keep the temperature in check. And that can significantly reduce the noise level. So this CPU is the best one, but if you're doing if you're using multiple programs, especially at the same time, like let's say for someone like me, I may use OBS, I may use various programs at the same time as I'm playing games, then this would not necessarily be the best CPU for someone like myself. But if you're just purely gaming, then yes, this is the best CPU to get for the price it has. There are more expensive CPUs. This is the thing. There are more expensive CPUs that would deliver similar gaming performance with this and be better in terms of multitasking. But in terms of pure gaming, like for the price point it offers, the best one to get right now. CPU cooling wise, the best one that exists is the Be Quiet Dark Rock Pro. Sure, there's Octo coolers, there's a bunch of different coolers. What I like about the Dark Rock Pro, beyond the fact that it runs pretty quiet, what's more important is it's designed in such a way that you won't have issues installing your RAM, which can be an issue in quite a few coolers. Like RAM clearance can be a problem. Like for instance, in my current CPU cooler, like one of my RAM slots is actually unavailable because of the cooler itself. It can be an issue, but this one is tall enough when it comes to that you will not have a problem installing your RAM. Pretty useful to take into consideration. Motherboard-wise, what are you looking in a motherboard? Well, with a motherboard, what you want is for the chipset to be of such a nature that the motherboard is going to fully utilize the full power of your CPU. For the Ryzen 7 7800 X3D, the socket is the X670 or X670E. And the best option that currently exists for that is the ASRock PG Lightning ATX AM5 motherboard. Because it does have that chipset, it will deliver the top-of-the-line CPU performance. More importantly, what you're looking at the motherboard is like memory capacity, memory type, memory speed. So what memory speed can a motherboard support? And this motherboard will support all the speeds that you'd actually want to use in tandem with that CPU. Because the CPU itself has certain limits in terms of memory, but then you also have to account for motherboard limits. Faster memory is generally better. And then of course you do want to have multiple NVMe slots for NVMe drives, all that kind of stuff. And ASRock does do a good job, though. If you're looking at this comment, it's like it's misleading since it is an X670 chipset. But what's important is that this particular motherboard is going to fully utilize your CPU, going to fully utilize the memory that will go along with that CPU, and does offer you all the slots you're going to need. It doesn't have all the features, but motherboards that have more features do cost significantly more. Like, this is, in a way, you could call it a bare bones motherboard, in the sense that it's all about the crucial features, the essential features that you'd want, not necessarily as much about like all the fluff you can also attach to a motherboard. That was what is important. Memory-wise, in this case, I've chosen Corsair Vengeance. You obviously, G-Skill is also an option. But what matters with memory is the following. Capacity. I would say, like, if you're building a computer that's going to last you for a couple of years from now, going with at least 32 gigs, maybe even 64 gigs would be really the way to go. Like, I would not go with anything less than 32 gigs at this very moment. That's the first thing to mention. 32 gigs is probably good enough to handle quite a lot of things that are going to be coming your way, though if you want to really future-proof it, go to 64 gigs, but keep in mind that it is going to be more expensive. Beyond that, you also want the memory frequency, the memory speed, to be as high as possible, in line with the support that both your motherboard and your CPU can handle. So both the CPU and the motherboard you're going can have limits. Like, you need to look at the specifications of that. This particular CPU, according to AMD, they recommend that you have memory that goes to 7,000 megahertz, which this memory does. DDR5 6,000 megahertz, and that's the recommendation from AMD themselves. So you want memory speed to be as high as possible within the support that both the motherboard and, crucially, the CPU can handle. This will improve your gaming performance. And then you want to get memory with as low latency as possible. The lowest I could find was CL30, though AMD does recommend going for CL36. I'm not sure if it would make a difference. Lower generally better, but of course limitations because CPU, motherboard, all that. Mainly the CPU. So this memory, you could drop it all the way to CL36. That's what you would go for. So higher capacity, higher speed, lower latency. That's what you're looking for when it comes to memory. Storage. Well, right now, some of the best storage options do come from Samsung, be it 970, 980, 990, in this case, the 990 Pro. The price difference is small enough between, say, the 980 990 that, honestly, I would really go with the 990. You can get much cheaper storage options, like you can get much cheaper NVMe drives. That will work pretty well all the same, if you so desire. But, like, if you really want to get the storage option that's going to be the most reliable and durable in your system for, let's say, a decade, as an example, then going with Samsung is not a bad choice. Again, there are cheaper options available, but this is one of the things that you might want to spend money. Like, if you want to save money, like buying a secondhand CPU, motherboard, memory, all that from the previous gen, you can save you a lot of money. But buying a brand new storage, that's really going to be useful because you're going to be using these for a long time. Like this particular CPU, cooler, motherboard, memory, they'd probably last you, let's say, half a decade. The storage would probably last you over a decade. Depends how intensely you use it. Storage options, SSDs, NVMe drives, they do have a lifespan limit of how much they can write. There's like only so many hundreds of terabytes that they can actually handle in terms of writing. Personally, I've had an SSD, not an NVMe drive, an SSD that I've been using for over a decade. It is reaching the end of its lifespan, but it has still 1, maybe 2 years worth in it, and it can handle anything I'm throwing at it. Sure, it's not as good as an NVMe drive. I do prefer having multiple drives as opposed to, let's say, getting just 1 2 terabyte one. I would say 2 terabytes is probably the sweet spot you want to go for, unless you really need more space for storage, but you can handle that with other older drives as well, or just get the 2 terabyte version, get 2 of these. But I do prefer having multiple drives, multiple high performance drives, because let's say on one I put the operating system and some other programs like browsers and all that, and on another one I put all the games that I install, and that may give you just a bit of a performance edge. That's my personal preference on that subject. You could, of course, just have less. You could of course have less problems and just go with a single drive, but personal preference, I do prefer having multiple drives with that. And like everything so far in this computer would be something that you could just install once and not have to bother for, let's say, half a decade, and they'd probably handle everything that you throw against them. any game and really a lot of programs as well. Keeping in mind that this particular CPU is not the best for high-intensity programs for productivity. So if you want productivity, you can go with Intel. Like, personal perspective, would I get this CPU? Just going to mention this. Would I personally purchase this CPU? I'd really want to because of the gaming performance, the temperature, and the power consumption. But given the programs I'd use, I'd probably go Intel. But if I was just purely gaming, yes, I would absolutely go with this CPU. It's just really great based on the benchmarks we're seeing. GPU side of things. Well, on the GPU, which is the big item on the menu, the most expensive part of your component by far. And the one I've selected here is quote unquote on the more cheaper side of things. Like there's a lot of GPUs that are really good at over $1,000, $1,200, or even more. When it comes to the GPU, the discussion is going to be between AMD and nvidia. And when it comes down to it, there are only a handful of models. Like, I would not get something like a 4060 or anything along those lines. I don't think that's worth it. Like, I'd rather buy a second-hand 3080 as opposed to a 4060. That's my personal perspective on that matter, because while there are certainly some benefits with the 40 series, like, you're probably going to get overall better performance with the 3080. Though, keep in mind, it's not going to be as relevant in terms of certain technologies as the 40 series. But yeah, the 60 version GPUs from NVIDIA, not really worth it. But right now, for 1440p gaming, the best GPU on the market is the 4070 Ti from NVIDIA. Why not something like a 4080 or an AMD XT 7900 or the XTX 7900? Well, let me just answer that in detail. The 4080 and XTX, so the NVIDIA 4080 or the AMD 7900 XTX, they're not really designed for being 1440p cards. They're designed to be 4K cards between their memory, performance, all that. Like, the cheapest you can get compared to, say, a 4070 Ti or an XT card is like $200 more. So you're spending over $1,000. But they don't necessarily have a performance advantage, or certainly not one to justify the cost at 1440p. Well, they can. Let's say you get 20 FPS with a 4080 versus a 4070 Ti in quite a few games. Is that worth $200 or rather $300 or even $400? That's up to you. But here's the thing. Of all the components in your computer, the GPU is the one that's going to become the least relevant the fastest. Like, other components can last you a long time, but GPUs, because of gaming advances, because of gaming technology, graphics technology, it's quite likely that the GPUs are going to last the least in your computer. So spending a lot of money on, say, something like a 4090 is just not worth it. And as I said, the 4080 and the XTX are really trying to be 4K gaming cards, but they just aren't there. We're not really there in terms of 4K gaming, unless you're willing to spend well over $1,000 more on your computer compared to what I'm recommending over here. If you think that's worth it, and keeping in mind that the computer won't last you as long as many years, go for it. But just keep in mind you're likely going to have to upgrade your computer faster. You're going to get performance issues quicker. That's the reason behind 1440p. So for 1440p gaming, there's only really two great choices, and that is either 4070 Ti from NVIDIA or the 7900 XT from AMD. They're roughly the same price. You might get some cheaper versions of the XT, but to be quite blunt about it, don't buy the cheapest versions of the GPU because they're crap. Like, cooling-wise, temperature-wise, and I say this for both NVIDIA and AMD. Don't do that. Go for options that have a good cooler, that have good performance, that might be more expensive, but are absolutely worth to go for. Because they will, like, it's not fun having a GPU that sounds like a jet engine when it's under load. And I've had that experience. I'm sure quite a few have had that experience. Like, not having that experience is quite important. Like, not having your PC turn into an oven just because your GPU is getting really hot when everything else can be cool in it. Not having your PC turn into an oven is certainly experience. Like, having your PC turn into an oven is not a great experience, suffice it to say. So you're down between the 7900 XT versus the 4070 Ti. And to be quite blunt about it, the 4070 Ti wins hands down. NVIDIA is actually winning hands down against AMD. The price on both the 4070 Ti and 7900 XT is roughly very similar. The performance on these cards is pretty similar. Like, okay, let's say there are some games the 7900 can win in, but that's only if you're discounting ray tracing, upscaling, and frame generation, which are going to become a much bigger deal going forward. But let's go over this. I've done a whole video on AMD versus NVIDIA. I won't really repeat myself, but here's things that are objectively true. Driver support is better with NVIDIA. This is something a lot of AMD users complain about. Are those complaints exaggerated? To some extent, but it's never a fun experience when you buy a new GPU, you install the drivers, and you have stability issues on a lot of games because of the drivers or performance issues. So driver support is generally better. The hardware that NVIDIA gives you, be it GeForce Experience, NVIDIA Broadcast, all those are better. Like if you're going to do any video recording, I know a lot of people won't care about that, but if you're going to do any video recording, local recording, not streaming, then NVIDIA is better. Like NVIDIA's Shadowplay Record, as it's called now, NVIDIA's record option is the best recording program for local recording of video games, flat out. And I say this as someone who's experimented with a lot of recording options over the years. There's no better recording program for local recording than NVIDIA Record, at least in terms of the performance impact. It just works, and it works really well, especially with HDR. And that's one thing to mention. So the software is better in that respect. The encoding, decoding, productivity. Like if you're using a lot of applications, right, that can require a lot from your system, NVIDIA is better. And this is something the tech media mentions. Like everything I'm talking about is something that you'll find in the tech media articles. What's infuriating about the tech media is they then argue that there's some kind of competition. There is no fucking competition between AMD and NVIDIA. Like AMD is just 1 or 2 generations behind NVIDIA. And that's been the case for quite a while now, like for a very, very long time. CPU side of things, there is a genuine competition between Intel and AMD. Completely different discussion. GPU side of things, AMD just doesn't care, ultimately. They really just don't care. They're playing catch-up, and they're fine playing catch-up to NVIDIA. And then when we're talking about gaming performance, ray tracing, which is becoming a bigger and bigger deal with every single year, ray tracing performance is substantially better on NVIDIA GPUs versus AMD, especially in games with heavy ray tracing. So think of something like Cyberpunk. And people say, oh, 99% of games it doesn't matter. To which my reply is, are you buying a GPU for games that already exist? I mean, you might for some that are recent, right? But in the vast majority of games, regardless of which company you're going for, you're going to get great performance for the vast majority of games. But really, what's important with the GPU is like, which GPU is going to be the most useful for the games that are going to be coming out for the next couple of years? Because a lot of those games are going to be using more and more ray tracing. That is the future. And then there's upscaling. DLSS is just flat out better than FSR. That is a fact. Not just in terms of the performance benefit, but also DLSS, quite crucially, in terms of image quality, DLSS has the best anti-aliasing method in gaming right now. So if you want to reduce aliasing right now, the best option is to use DLSS. By far. You may not even use DLSS for the performance game at all. You might just use it purely for the anti-aliasing benefit. Like either the quality preset or certain games do allow you to just use the anti-aliasing method of DLSS in those games. I mean, AMD, of course, other companies do have their options, but ultimately, yeah, NVIDIA wins hands down on that. And then frame generation. Frame generation is ludicrous. It can double your frame rate. Yes, you're going to pay for that and input lag, but honestly, like, it is insane. And frame generation especially matters in those games that may not be so well optimized. Like, look at this year. We've had Hogwarts Legacy. We've had Jedi Survivor. God only knows how Starfield is going to be, though if history tells us anything about Bethesda, it's probably not going to run all that well, and it's going to have a lot of issues. And you might say, oh, well, Starfield has an AMD partnership. Yeah, fun fact, people can mod frame generation into games because people have been able to mod ray tracing. Sure, the performance benefit is not quite going to be quite as great, but the fact that people can mod it into a game opens a whole other world of possibilities, because modding DLSS into a game, not really worth it. Modding frame generation into a game, that is a completely different story. We've already seen this with Jedi Survivor and what we can get to on that. So yeah, NVIDIA wins hands down. And the 4070 Ti, well, what is the 4070 Ti? It's basically a 12 gig version of the 4080. So while it runs worse than the 4080, you're basically getting something very similar to the 4080, just with less VRAM. Does that matter? It does, but it's not so important for 1440p gaming as it is in 4K gaming. This is not a 4K gaming GPU. It's a 1440p gaming GPU. Okay, all that said, why this particular model? Well, there is an OC version from PNI. That may run better, but here's my reasoning behind this. There are many models available, and you have to decide which one you care about. Like, you can go for the higher end one, like Asus has one with Noctua fans. But what I really like about this PNI model, and the reason I got it, for overclocking, it's not going to have the best potential. It's fairly limited when it comes to that. Personally, don't really care about overclocking. But here's the crucial thing. Cooling. This thing, beyond the fact that NVIDIA has lower power consumptions than AMD, NVIDIA typically runs at lower temperatures than AMD. And this particular GPU has such an exceptional cooler. Yes, it doesn't look that pretty. In fact, I personally detest how it looks. But the cooler is so exceptional. It's really big as a GPU, but the cooler is of such of an exceptional nature that even people who think the GPU as a whole is like a B tier GPU, they admit it's like the cooler on this thing is an S rank easily. It's really good. It runs very quiet. It runs very quiet, and the temperatures are pretty low. If I put this card under complete load at 100% GPU usage, which is not a situation you typically encounter in games, I wish to emphasize that. Like, you will have spikes, but consistent 100% usage for like hours, you're probably not going to encounter that all that often. But if you put this GPU under a stress test and also put the CPU under a stress test, you're not really going to go over like 65 degrees. And the fans are probably not even going to be heard over your case fans. Like, in my personal computer, I hear my case fans more than I hear this thing when the fans are automated. Sure, if I turn it to 100%, I will hear it. It's going to be very loud, but I've never seen it get anywhere close to 100%, like 50% or so fan speed on this thing under complete load. So this one is got a very good cooler. Hell, I think even the 4080 version of this card, like the pure 4080, like would be really worth it. The Verto Epic X from PNI is an amazing GPU from the perspective of cooling and noise level, which to me matters quite a bit more. If you care about overclock and all that, sure, there are different models of GPUs out there, absolutely. But when it comes to noise level, when it comes to cooling, this is the best one I'd personally recommend. But different models, look at the benchmarks, look at the specifications of that. In terms of a case, many different cases. This is the one I personally use. It's not the newest, it's not the best, I admit, but it is available for a fairly decent price. The Fractal Design Define S. I don't have the one with the glass, though. What's great about a case like this, what are you looking at a case? You're looking at good cooling, you're looking at the ability of installing top fans, because the reason you want top fans, where does heat go? It goes to the top. So installing fans there can help with cooling. It's something I've noticed going from a case that didn't have top fans to one that did. The temperatures certainly went lower. And also the airflow in this case, the space you have, the cable management options, the options to install older SSDs, all that is really great. And this is the kind of thing you would be looking in a case like just a lot of space, a lot of room for cable management. It is big, it can be heavy, don't get me wrong, fully loaded with everything your PC has, especially the current gen GPUs, which are insane in terms of size. Yes, it is going to be ridiculously heavy, but it is absolutely worth it. While the fans on this are not the best, well, if you want good case fans, go with Noctua. And that's the reason I've put Noctua fans, case fans over here. 140mm fans. Like, Noctua just makes good fans in general. Probably should have picked the brown ones, but these black ones, yeah, just change the red over here to black and they'll look quite well. They'll fit in very well. Or just go with the old school brown color of Noctua fans, because they're hideous, sure, but hey, they're Noctua fans. They run very well. In terms of other things like it does come down to personal preference with like things like keyboard, mouse, headphones, all that kind of stuff. But my personal recommendation with the mouse, SteelSeries Sensei Free 10, if you're looking for a wire mouse, it would be a really good choice. But it really does depend on like what you want, how many mouse buttons you want. Like what I like about this one is that it's relatively easy to use and it's really accurate in terms of shooters. Like that's the reason I actually purchased it quite a few years ago. And it's been very reliable for me personally. Headphone wise, again, many choices, wired, wireless, all that. But what I'm interested personally with headphones, the reason I'd recommend the SteelSeries Arctis Pro, though there's some newer models as well from SteelSeries that you can use and very good as well. But why I'd recommend something like this is because, one, the sound quality is pretty solid. Not necessarily the best in the world, sure, but the comfort level you're going to get with these kind of headphones, with this specific set, for instance, is pretty great. Like, I have gamed a lot of hours with a very similar headphone, like not these exact ones, but very similar, still from SteelSeries, still Arctis. I've gained quite a lot of hours with a very high comfort level, and that is important. Like just having headphones that will fit on your head and be comfortable for long sessions is important. And on top of that, these things are durable. Like the cable, because of its design, the cable can be unplugged, and so you don't get that situation which you might get with a lot of wired headphones, certainly the one I've had over quite a few years, where you just ultimately break the cable. Like you'll strain the cable, but you can be fairly brutal with these and they'll just keep going. Like I've had my own version for like, I don't know, 4 years now or something like that on those signs. They're still going and I'm not going to replace them anytime soon. Great quality and great, just great quality, great design, durability being pretty important. And all of this is $2,400. Take down like, let's say $200 or so $2,200 for everything except the mouse and the headphones, right, for this entire system. And this computer would handle any game you throw against it at 1440p 60 FPS plus. The vast majority of games are going to run much better. You're going to have a system that's going to last you for quite a few years, and that's important. So just remember the principles. Like with CPU, you're obviously going to look at like what's the temperature that the CPU is going to run at, what performance is going to have in games, what performance is going to have in programs. With the cooler, you want reduced noise level, but you also want to have space for memory. With the motherboard, you want the chipset and the memory capacity go along with the CPU and the memory you're going to get. With memory, you want high capacity, high frequency, low latency memory. With storage, NVMe, Samsung in particular, really good, but others work as well. NVMe drives, multiple drives, just for the sake of safety, really. In case one fails, and it's very rare for that to happen, you can rely on the other one, so you can back up your files on both of them. GPU, NVIDIA wins against AMD, and for 1440p gaming, 4070 Ti is the best option, with PNI just being really good for the sake of noise level and temperature level. Also, yeah, ray tracing, frame gen, upscaling being far superior with NVIDIA. At the moment, AMD is promising that they're going to release FSR free, and that's going to have a better frame gen version than what NVIDIA is offering. I'll believe it when I see it. The case, fundamentally, what you're looking with the case is a lot of space, good airflow, the ability to install top fans. Oh, I didn't mention the power supply unit. I'll just get into this in a second. With power supply unit, I blatantly forgot. But with the power supply unit, what you're looking for with a power supply unit is gold certified, so 80 plus gold certified. You can obviously go higher, but it's not necessarily important. The power supply unit might be the most durable thing that you get in your computer. And what you're really looking for, you're looking for this particular power connector, which it does have. Like the power connector from ATX 3.0 power supply units, the plug, that's become very relevant with most recent GPUs. You can still use an older style power supply unit. It does work. You're not really necessarily going to have too many problems, but if you're going to future-proof your system, you want to go for that. Now, there's not many ATX 3.0 power supply units. That's the problem. There's only a handful of models on the market and only a handful of companies. But out of the companies that do exist, Seasonic is the best the best one of the best ones on the market. And this particular version, even if you're going with lower watts, like you can go with a 50, 1,000, whatever, this particular one, the Vertex GX, that's what you're looking for, is flat out the best, I believe, on the market. Could be wrong on this, but based on all I've seen, like in terms of like reliability, in terms of quality, like it's really good, it's quiet, it runs very well. Now, why 1200 watts, right? Future proofing. Like I got a decade ago, I got 750 watt power supply. Now that was far more than I required at the time, and I only recently switched it. But I used it for over a decade to understand why going for a more expensive power supply. Because let me just mention this: the a 50 watt power supply version is like $40-50 cheaper, but it won't last you a damn decade, because right now with higher and higher power supply requirements, you're not going to necessarily be able to rely on an 850 watt power supply, whereas you absolutely can rely on a 1200 watt power supply. Also, here's something to mention when it comes to buying a power supply. Power supply is, as they age, as you use them during their lifespan, they're just going to generate less power. This is something I remember reading quite a few years ago. So buying a power supply at a higher capacity, the reason that's important is because it gives you that buffer. It gives you that space for you to use it for a lot of years and still be very relevant. Unless GPU manufacturers screw us over again with the cables, but that's a different discussion. Currently, though, if you want to buy a power supply unit that will be used for a long period of time, you can't do wrong with something like the Seasonic Vertex GX. But really, what you're interested in is gold certified, having the ATX 3.0 format with that cable for the most recent GPUs. The last two things I would like to mention are with regards to a gaming chair. Now, honestly, a lot of gaming chairs are not worth picking up, but there is one particular model that is absolutely worth it, and that is the Secret Titan chair. The reason it's worth picking up is, one, it's very durable, and two, very comfortable. It might feel, it might not necessarily be the softest chair, but it's certainly a very, very durable chair that is going to be good for your back, because in long gaming sessions, that is important. The current model does have very easily detachable pillows, pillow detachable arms, because the armrests are the one thing that might be used the quickest. And this is the soft weave version. Now, why soft weave? Why not leather? Durability. I don't know about you guys, but when I'm spending a lot of time gaming during the summer, you do sweat, right? And you're going to wear down through the leather. Regardless of the quality of the leather, it doesn't matter. You're going to wear through it. Whereas the soft weave will last you a very, very long period of time, even if you're using it intensely. I personally do. I have not quite this model, but still a Secret Titan, the older model that doesn't have the magnetic memory foam. But this one is good for your back. It's good for your comfort level. It is very durable. It will keep working for a very long period of time. Now, it is roughly, let's say, $600, 600 euros, or something along those lines. So you add 600, so you're already looking at like $3,000 for a computer. And then to talk about the display, believe it or not, displays can be really annoying to get a good display if you're especially looking for HDR. So why HDR? Well, it looks pretty amazing with HDR. But when you're looking at an HDR monitor, you don't want to get HDR10. Based on all I've read, when I did a lot of research to figure out which monitor I wanted for HDR, for at least good image quality, you want to go with HDR 600 at the very least. Now, plenty of monitors, but an IPS HDR 600 monitor with a good response time, with a low response time, with as low of a response time as possible. And what I found was the Predator XB3 gaming monitor, XB32 free. Now, this is a 32-inch monitor. I personally prefer that size because I have poor eyesight, so I do want a bigger monitor. If you want a smaller one, sure, no problem. There are other models available, but it can be annoying to get this. This does go to 170 hertz when it comes to DisplayPort, so it can handle. It is a high-performing monitor. There is a downside with this in that it can get too warm, so there is a trade-off. This is like a cheaper version. Like alternatives at this time when I was looking to purchase this were like over to $1,000, maybe even $2,000. Like if you want a really high quality display, like an OLED TV might just be the option for some monitors that do exist right now. But if you want to save some money but still get a very high quality display, something like this would be highly recommended. So in total, something closer to $4,000 for an entire gaming system. It is expensive, but keep in mind, with all the things that I've said here, there are ways to spend a significantly higher amount of money. Like you can go at the GPU that's double the cost of the one I recommend. You can get more expensive CPUs. You can get more expensive memories. Like the important thing is to get components that deliver a high level of performance and yet don't cost you an arm and a leg, as some do. Because the ones that are the most expensive are not necessarily going to give you the performance you actually want, or the performance benefit of, say, a higher-end CPU in terms of gaming is not necessarily going to be worth all that extra money. If you're interested in productivity, though, with CPU, like, yeah, Intel is the way to go right now, or the 1700K CPU is probably worth it. And that is it. Costin signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.